Welcome to Automotive EV. My name is Peter Wooding and thank you for joining us. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Justin Benson, who's a partner and head of automotive for Vendigital, who is going to take us through the automotive outlook. This is the first episode in a series of 6 episodes looking at the outbound supply chain, and also concentrating on the latest developments within the full battery electric vehicles. So thanks for joining us, Justin. And if that's okay, I will hand over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Well, hello, everyone. I hope your lockdown haircuts are bearing better than mine, but we'll crack on and talk about electric vehicles. So if we get the bad news out of the way first, across the car industry as a whole, for those of you who are regular visitors for this sort of monthly event now, you'll be aware of this. Obviously, last year wasn't a very good year for automotive as a whole, and broadly 30% down on previous year. And of course, in January this year, it's 40% down, unfortunately, but that's again mainly due to the lockdown hitting so hard in the early part of January. I mean, and that is not good. If you look at it from a retailer's perspective, there's a lot of concern about what's going to happen come March time. March, obviously, a very big month, and but having said that, online sales have been increasing quite dramatically as well, and more on that in a moment. But if you like, that's probably most of the bad news out of the way, although it's quite significant. There's some interesting other things going on, of course, which is with the battery market. This is the UK, and I'll talk about the wider Europe and a bit about the rest of the world in a moment. But UK battery electric vehicles, and this is purely battery now, this is no hybrid or plug-ins or plug-in hybrids. This is purely plug-in, pure battery electric vehicles. Has grown significantly, obviously over the last 12 months, and even in January, considering the lockdown, it grew January on January by 54%. So it continues. I wonder if the pandemic is having a slight effect on if you like, flattening out the curve a tad in the short term, but that might be to be expected. I think it remains to be seen just as we get into the first quarter of this year, or get to the end of the first quarter of this year, as to how it's really affected battery electric vehicle sales. But if you look at last year and you look at the way things are going so far this year, the story continues in a very positive way for electric vehicle sales. You will have seen this. I've changed this slide. This is a sort of a view as to where we're going in the future across Western Europe, and this is for plug-in. So this does include plug-in hybrids as well as complete battery electric vehicles. You'll all be aware of the incentives that are available, and again, UK hasn't changed. It's one of the few in Europe actually that have not changed. But I thought it was worth a moment just to take what is really driving this. I mean, it is a massive regulatory driver, in the sense that, you know, if you are not meeting 95 grams per kilometre across your portfolio of models, then you get fined by the European Union, and it's 95 euros and it's multiplied by the volume of the new cars from the previous year. So it's really important to the manufacturers that they start to make low emission vehicles. Now, in many respects, there's many ways you could do that. You could use internal combustion engines, and the smaller ones, a lot of them could help you reach that target, and a lot are in many instances. But the battery, obviously, full battery electric vehicles is really the answer to make that leap towards zero, because that target of 95 grams per kilometre is only going to reduce over time as part of the regulations. So this is going to drive sales, and I think I've mentioned this before. The top table is if you like, a number of pundits have come together, and this is like a move to where we think it's going to go. And I put an alternative view in there where I mean, based on not much other than my personal feel for the way things are going, I think things are going to accelerate as we get into the next couple of years. So if you think about, I mean, JLR announced yesterday its full move to battery electric vehicles in the Jaguar range by the middle of this decade, and then to fully electric Range Rovers by the middle of next decade. So incredibly inspiring in many ways, objectives. But broadly speaking, this is the way I think that most automotive car manufacturers are going to go, and this is what's driving it. Some highlights, just a few observations really, if nothing else. I think I've mentioned this before, but the number of BEV models available have increased to 60. We're expecting over 130 plug-in type models to come across Europe over the next 12 months or so. And then you've got Volkswagen, and I'll demonstrate that they are starting to lead the pack now with their fully electric vehicle strategy. Their plans are not to have hybrids. I mean, some of their more outlying brands like Bentley, for example, will have them for a while, but in general, most of their vehicles will be fully battery electric, and that includes their commercial vehicle range as well. So Mercedes and BMW more of a PHEV strategy, and that's how they're meeting those regulations I mentioned earlier. And quite a big number last year sold in Europe, 1.3 million plug-in models. And let's just think about that for a moment. Where does that sit, if you like, on a European and global scale? And another observation is that it's selling more plug-in type hybrids, so battery electric vehicles and PHEVs, than in China last year, which has got to be a first, and it's a little bit surprising, but it's fascinating to see that Europe is starting to catch up with the sales, if you like, if not many other aspects of the supply chain, which again I'll come on to shortly. Just some more observations on the right-hand side. If you take the UK, most, if not all, sales were online. Obviously the sites were closed, but I actually speaking to a number of them in the market. They were all saying that they were maintaining about 60% of their general market levels in January, which I thought was excellent and very helpful in many ways. But it shows that the demand is out there and actually points to quite a positive bounce back when we come out of lockdown. At least that's my optimistic view. Dealer online experience is improving. There's a number of the retailers out there, not just the OEM sales companies, but also the dealerships themselves are improving their online experience. They realize that that's going to have to get better and better if they're going to remain competitive in this market. And a couple of other thoughts. Circa 20% of Tesla, roughly 20, might be slightly under actually 20% of Tesla Models 3s that were sold in Western Europe were made in China. So you're starting to get some Chinese products coming in to Europe. Be interested to see if that develops in the future. And then Hyundai, Kia are growing their market BEV share. I mean, I mentioned those guys because they are actually bringing in new models now quite regularly, and there's one or two coming up which you might keep an eye on, which could be interesting to see how they grab market share. This is one of those complicated graphs which just shows the growth in each country and how it's developing from both a BEV and a PHEV perspective. You obviously the three biggest markets there, you can see Germany, France and the UK. Interestingly, the Germans in particular are very fond of their PHEVs as well as the BEV market, whereas we're probably selling a bit more BEVs in UK and France compared to the PHEVs, if you will. Hopefully you're following what I'm saying there. But it's, I mean, my personal view is that the hybrid model is helpful, but you can see the regulation changing even further in the future, and you can see the move towards battery, and the technology is improving all the time. And I'll go into that in a bit more detail in a moment. But it's just the drive is towards fully battery electric at the moment, and it's quite incredible how the numbers are changing, which is illustrated by this graph again. Registrations 12 months. I mean, in the last quarter, Germany just went a bit bonkers, really. A lot of that was plug-in hybrids rather than pure battery electric vehicles, but nevertheless, it's a big increase. fully battery electric. And also UK saw an uptick, as did France. So, it doesn't take an Einstein, does it? I don't see this plateauing out too soon. I just see it continuing to increase. Now, how's that increase being met? Well, for those who are a bit more regular, you'll have seen that I share this as a sort of a proxy for the European manufacturing market. But the German production of BEVs and some hybrids is hovering now between 15 and 20% of the capacity of making vehicles in Germany. And I see that upticking again even more, particularly as Volkswagen sell more brands and bring more factories online. So it's happening, and the investment in production and supply is there also. It's just, again, you probably know me by now, like a few stats. This is a breakdown of the market share. You started to see how the different brands are jockeying for position in the market. It's getting interesting. You can see Volkswagen in the second half of last year took a big leap. I'll explain why in a moment. But it's starting to get interesting, and where the players are starting to lay out, and where their investments, if you like, of even 4 or 5 years ago, are starting now to hit the market. So this is, I shared this because I guess if you're in the market for electric vehicle, then you might be interested in this anyway. But there's a few here which are worth noting. Renault Zoe has always been one of the top sellers in Europe. But the Volkswagen ID.3, it was delayed. So all those figures are pretty much in the second half. So if you think about how that might affect this year, and the sales there, that's looking like a really product, a product of its time, as much as some of the others. As I mentioned, Hyundai, Kia. One or two of you might be able to spot those which are conspicuous by their absence. They're just outside the top 10, but it's interesting they're not in the top 10. But keep an eye out. I suspect they won't be far behind in the next few months. So I thought that I would just, so at this point, so if you think about that as battery electric vehicles, and I think about some of the work that you do, if you like, in the audience around how you are moving equipment around Europe and in and out of the UK, etc. You will be probably grappling with a number of the administrative issues that were caused by Brexit, or the new free trade agreement, etc. And you'll all be well in the detail of that. And so I'm not going to talk about that. But what I thought would be useful is, if you think about an electric vehicle, and any electric vehicle, one of the biggest, the heaviest pieces of equipment and the most expensive is the battery, or the battery pack that the designers put into the vehicle. So I thought it would be helpful just to think about some of going down into the supply chain a little bit further, and thinking about how that is going to develop over the next, literally, I would say 2 to 5 years. I think it's getting very interesting indeed. So, if I can get to the next slide. Here we go. So on the right-hand side, I like this because it's demonstrating those companies which are investing in Europe and what they're doing. You'll see the plant in the UK as well, which is up by which provides the batteries for the Leaf, and one or two others up in the northeast of England there, which is nice to see. But you can start to see a cluster occurring around Germany and Central Europe, of what's going on in the battery world. And these are, generally speaking, battery manufacturers, but also they are battery supply chain componentry manufacturers as well. So things like cathodes, and of course the powders and the minerals that you need to get out of the ground. Not least in this case, this is I got this from a company called Infinity, who are trying to develop a mining site in Spain to help serve that market, so that they can provide lithium hydroxide, which is a key component in a lot of battery manufacture. So it's starting to mature, but it's still inefficient, and it's not integrated yet. for those like Volkswagen, for example, who are looking at fully integrated supply chain for themselves, in effect, or close to fully integrated, there is probably some real returns to see in the future. But and they will sort of be integrated by naturally, if you will, is what I'm saying. Whereas the others are all players in certain parts of the market, in certain parts of the supply chain. So it's bearing in mind what that is currently looking like compared to where it might go. So that's a little bit of where it might be going in the future. But at the moment, batteries are built broadly like this. If I can change the slide again. So I'm sure a number of you are aware of this, but the kit moves around the world, and a lot of the minerals that come out of the ground, a lot of the IP and so on is in Southeast, is in Asia or in the US, and obviously South America with the mines. So you have to think about, particularly if you're, say, an auto manufacturer or you're a manufacturer in general, how do I move this kit around, and how can I move it around efficiently, effectively, but also sustainably, in a way that I'm not creating huge carbon footprints. And at the moment, and I think this is one of the arguments for the non-believers, and it's a fair one, that there is issues with the supply chain in that it uses a lot of fossil fuels to make the batteries, to make the cars, etc. And if you look at the bottom half of that slide, about 71% of the costs, sorry, the statistics go to the first three elements, so Chile, USA, Japan. That first three elements, about 71% of the cost of the battery is in that area. So there's a lot going on in this market, and it needs a lot of energy to move the stuff around. So it's going to be really important in the future to make sure that your factories, that your supply chain is all supported by renewable forms of energy, and that is on the go. And part of that is to get your minerals closer to your chemical factories that are making the chemicals in which you need to build cathodes to then go into cells. So these are really important moments to think about your supply chain in a way that is sustainable, is that you are using renewable energy. I mean, it is getting to the point now where if you're building a factory and you're still using coal to fire the kilns, as it were, then you're going to get a knock on the door from the automotive customer or even an energy customer and saying, "Excuse me, I'm afraid I can't take your product anymore because you use too much fossil fuels to make it." So that's a really important point from this, that your own supply chains in which you are managing and working, and those that you are providing for your customers, and your customers are building for their products and their new products of the future. It's really important that they think about renewable forms of energy when they are powering their supply chains and their factories and their manufacturing processes. There's an example of that. I've just pretty much talked through that slide on the previous one, where if you reduce the time it takes and you take out some elements of the supply chain by getting your battery manufacturing facility, for example, closer to the minerals, then you can start to take out big chunks of the carbon footprint. But it isn't just making it very efficient. It is that's really important. But you also need to be really thinking about, where do I get my renewable energy from at the same time? So it starts to affect your choice of sites, your choice of how you move goods around, and the kind of suppliers that you talk to, and how are they thinking the same way as you about the sustainable supply chain. So just to finish off, I mean, some of the points I think I've raised as we've gone along, and I've mentioned it before, but cost competitiveness is becoming key. You're starting to get quite a competitive market in the supply chain for all elements of the new battery electric vehicles, and the consumer is going to want a much more price competitive vehicle at the end, so you've got to get the cost right. So some of this comes from supply chain efficiency, including sourcing strategies. And what I've come across recently, in particular, perhaps it's it's not exactly rocket science, but when you're building a new supply chain, particularly around batteries, and you're developing it into your electric vehicles, the benchmarking supplies takes time. And if you are either selling into companies that are serving this market, or your buyers in that market, then I really advise you start this benchmarking exercise and the whole process of choosing your right partner as early as possible in the process. Because if you leave it as a sort of iterative process, you could find all of a sudden that the project is taking you a lot longer, because it needs time and it needs new expertise, so you get it right. Plus, you want to get the cost right from the start. Obviously, if you bake in costs that then start to make you non-cost competitive at a later date, it becomes harder to roll back. So get some advice. I suppose I would say that, wouldn't I? But genuinely get some advice, get some challenge, get some thinking into your sourcing strategies right at the very beginning. And finally, something else, I go on about this quite a bit, the joining up your systems. If you are working across fleets, warehouses, new kit, you've got safety issues with this particular product. The battery is quite a dangerous piece of kit. You need to be thinking about what's happening with your data, and are you getting the right data to demonstrate that your business is going in the right direction. And a particular area of that, and it's an example of getting on top of your cost, is trying to avoid the silos. So think about when you're designing something, either a service or a product, and engineering it, link it in with procurement as well. So if you link all those things in, you'll get a much better obviously, the customer will be a good one to include as well, but I'm assuming that's a bit of assumptive. But if you link those three together much more at the beginning of your product development or service development process, you will create a much more effective and effective service or product, and at the right cost level for you to compete in the market. Love to talk about that some more, but I think that's probably enough from me. Hopefully that's been helpful. And any thoughts, questions before we finish off? Peter, I'm not sure whether I'm supposed to be getting questions or not, or whether you might be. Is Peter? Oh, I think you're on mute, Peter. Peter's gone for some lunch.
I think I've managed
there he is.
To myself for a few minutes there. It's amazing with these machines where you have different ways of unmuting, and you choose the wrong one. But great presentation, thank you. And really a little bit of an eye-opener. Richard from our production has, I think, one or two questions that have come through. But firstly, for me, looking at the sort of latter part of the distribution base, it appears that sort of looking at Tesla, what 20% of vehicles sold in Europe are made in China.
Yeah.
Do you see them losing an element more to what I'll call homegrown with Volkswagen, because those new models that they're creating are don't only look good, but they're stunningly engineered cars. So.
Yeah, it's a function of the competitive market. I mean, Tesla got in early, one of the first movers, if you like, and made a profound effect in the US and here, and make a great product, and that's come over. But what happened soon after that was that, and I think I've demonstrated this over the presentations, Peter, over the last 6 months or so, is that there's been all the new models made by European manufacturers have been hitting the market, and then they've all been jockeying for their market position, because it may not be exactly the same as Tesla, i.e. Tesla sort of in that mid-premium area. Others are still trying to go for the volume, and so there are different products. So it's different products for different people who want to buy different types of vehicles depending on what they want to use them for. But it's just, I think it's part of it. A big part of it is actually just that market positioning, whereby new entrants have come in and has had an effect on an existing market entrant. However, having said that, the other one is that Tesla are trying to increase production dramatically for obvious reasons, because the demand is there around the world, and I think they're finding it's for them to grow to the size that they are, or size they need to be, has been more challenging than perhaps they thought. And the likes of Volkswagen, of course, and the South Koreans and the Japanese and so on. We've been making cars for 100 years, And I think what they've been able to do is to get, to respond to that market dynamic pretty quickly, perhaps quicker than people thought, and are releasing so many new models which are in that competitive mix. So I think Tesla's here to stay. I think they're going to be around for a long time. I mean, I'm sure the shareholders would hope so, based on the market capitalization of the company. But there's a real opportunity for everyone to enjoy a real strong period of growth now over the next 5 to 10 years.
Do you see though that with putting them in the sort of the level of premium within Audi and Jaguar Land Rover and so on, are we going to look at a greater number of vehicles produced by Volkswagen Group and JLR actually being shipped over to China rather than the other route? Will it balance, or?
Well, I mean, exports will continue. The standing of German and European and UK brands is very high around the world, and perhaps more so in China. So I think it's maybe a slightly red herring that Tesla is putting some cars from the China market into the European market. I think they're doing it because they're trying to meet demand, and they can do that, and they're trying that out. I think it's so far as the way in which the vehicles will continue to trade across boundaries, UK, Europe, China, or the States, will balance out with time. But this is the real moment to think about your market position. How much do you want to be a market leader in this area, whether it be batteries, cathodes, or the vehicle itself? Because there's the difference, if you like, with the old supply chain is that a lot of the products in the automotive supply chain can be used for many other applications, i.e. the battery, for example, and a lot of the componentry around a battery. So the applications for home use, the use in other industrial applications and so on is massive. So the battery as a whole is here to stay. So there's elements of that which is driving these battery gigafactories as much as Tesla's pricing at the moment. So from a car perspective, if you are manufacturing cars, you want to be in this place where you're experiencing this wonderful time of growth. But there is a lot more going on behind the scenes, particularly in the battery area. This is why a lot of the car manufacturers want to make their own batteries, because they can see markets outside of vehicles for that in the future. Excuse me.
A question in from David S. JLR are coming from a long way behind the competition. Can they catch up?
Well, yes, depends on how far behind you think they are. I think they took a big leap yesterday, at least in the intent, to where they need to be and where they would like to be. So I think the short answer to your question is yes. From what I understand about the company and its history, and I've worked with JLR on and off for quite a long time. They're a great company, and it certainly struck me yesterday is that they've got a fantastic plan, and so yes, I think they can. I mean, I think that saying you're going to move an entire brand to electric within 3 years, maybe 4. Look, give them a break, is a fantastic goal, and it makes you think that if they're going to say that, they must have the designs on the drawing board. They have a lot of the thinking in place. So it is a matter of implementation, which is going to be a fantastic journey for them in the next 2 or 3 years. And I mean, Jaguar's had its ups and downs as a brand in the last 70, 80 years, but it's a fantastic brand, as is Range Rover. Those are 2 brands that are going to go on for another 50 plus years, I think. So I really look forward to seeing the products that they make. I think they're going to be fantastic.
Another question in from John Williams. Thanks for the great presentation, Justin. Question, do you see the trade in CO2 rights to continue between manufacturers? Tesla has helped FCA last year pretty well.
Yeah. For the time being, yes, but it's that word again, sustainable. I don't know how sustainable it is, because I think you're referring to it's what I often call carpooling. So what happened between FCA and Tesla? So FCA, arguably a little bit further behind many of the others, wants to avoid the fine. So they pooled their vehicles with Tesla vehicles to bring their average emissions down significantly. In some respects, you might argue they paid the fine to Tesla, I suppose, but it helps them. It buys time in order for them to build the kind of products that they need to hit the market so that they can meet the regulations. And if you look at there's a recent, I can't remember if it was launched, so it was just a teaser, but it's the new Fiat 500 electric vehicle. I mean, it looks great. If it start to do, if it does what it says it does on the tin, that would be a great, people's car, if I can put it that way. That'll be a great mass market car in many respects if the price point is right. So these pooling areas, I think, are temporary, and to be, in my view, I don't think the regulator would see much truck in them if they were carrying on into the second half of this decade. They'd be wondering, well, why are you in the market? Because you're just paying someone else to try and avoid, the regulations. So, but I think it's a helpful near-term solution in order to get yourself ready to meet the demands of your customers, but also the regulation.
Going back to your slides for a second, because I know we're actually running over now.
Okay.
BMW I was not expecting to see BMW lower than being in the first 10, irrespective of how close they are to the first 10. To me, that was quite a significant sort of omission on that chart.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the market positioning again. I think there's people jockeying for their positions. Remember, this is for battery electric vehicles. It doesn't include hybrids
Yes.
As such. So and BMW has more of a plug-in hybrid strategy compared to, say, a Volkswagen. So I think it's some of the auto manufacturers are, in a way, they're feeling their way through this now. They're starting to launch the product. There's a bit of fingers crossed behind the back, thinking, right, come on now, be good for us, because we're putting it at the right price point. We put in a lot of investment into this. We're trying to make the right car for the right market, and so on. And some people like plug-in hybrids because you don't get the range anxiety. Others go purely battery electric because they're a bit more driven by, say, climate change or the like. So again, it's a bit horses for courses at the moment. It will be interesting to see who wins out. But my concern about hybrids is that you have two drivetrains. So you've got the drivetrain, you've got the internal combustion engine drivetrain and the electric vehicle drivetrain in the same vehicle. So arguably, there's more to go wrong. It's expensive to make. It's quite expensive to service and keep on the road. So albeit it sorts the range issue out, I just wonder whether, because if the technology around fully battery electric vehicles continues, and please do remember, particularly if you're buying one, you can charge at home. Since cars were manufactured back in the 1910s, 20s, and so on, and they were internal combustion engines, you've never been able to fill your car up at home. I guess unless you're a Shell executive, perhaps. But you had to drive a vehicle to a third party to get filled up. Here you can do it at home. So if you think about your commuting, your general usage of the vehicle, and you consider that 85% of all journeys are less than 15 miles in length, a battery electric vehicle will suit most people tremendously well. And as the technology improves, which is happening now over the next year or two, we'll have to see how long hybrids last. But my colleagues would want to kick me for saying that, but I think there's a strong move now towards fully battery electric.
Yeah, I think that's right, personally. One final question. I think we'll have to call this one the last one. This from Javier. Thanks for the presentation. As far as he knows, Tesla is building the factory in Germany, then its distribution costs in Europe will drop dramatically, thus improving its competitive position. Would you say that's right?
Yeah, I would, because it's the main thing. Well, it's building a gigafactory in Germany at the moment. So yes, that's going to help its competitive position greatly, because it'll be able to manufacture more cars locally, or at least manufacturing more equipment, more of the equipment locally. So yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think you can see Tesla's strategy and see what they're doing, but their valuation and where they're going is very exciting. But they've got to deliver the plan, and part of it is they've got to have these gigafactories in every continent, or even numbers of countries of continents, in order to meet the demand and to meet the futuristic, if I may say, of the valuation. And it will, but it's doing it. You can't deny. So I think that's a very good observation. I think that is definitely right. That will happen. But again, that's the one area where Tesla is having to catch up, because all the others have got existing plant, and they're ripping out the internal combustion engine type production processes and putting in the new electric vehicle battery processes. And they've been able to do that because they've got the sites, they've got the people, they've got everything there. To a degree, it's been a bit harder for Tesla because they've had to do it from scratch. And they've had to employ the people, they've had to get all the partners in place, etc., etc., etc. So, but they're going quick. I mean, if you have a look at the site, the German factory to me doesn't look like it's far off being completed. I think it's just due to come online this year. I mean, I don't know, but it's planned to be online this year. But even if it's next year, it's been an incredible achievement.
Thank you. Well, obviously we've gone over, but really appreciate that. We always have a number of people who don't like to, for some reason, ask questions in an open forum. But for anyone with any additional questions, don't forget you're able to contact Justin directly, send him a personal message, and I'm sure he'll come back to you and answer them. It's been a great start to the Outbound series, thanks. And we're fortunate Justin will be joining us for the final futures session on the 18th of March. And that will be a total Q&A and panel discussion. So everyone, you'll get the opportunity to ask further questions as you feel appropriate, having sort of gone through all of the individual parts. So thanks, Justin. Really appreciate your time. Thanks, everybody, for watching. And don't forget to connect with each other. We can get a far bigger build-up and dialogue when we're all sort of singing on the same hymn sheet, if you want to call it that. Thanks, Justin. Thank you, everybody. And
good luck, everyone. Keep safe.
Keep safe.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye then. Bye.
Hi, it's Peter again, and thank you for watching the session. Don't forget you can connect with all members within the EV community. Send messages to each other and start to build relationships for the future. Also, take a look at our supplier showrooms. Our partners have got lots of products and services that they have to offer, which again could be of benefit to you. Make the most of the opportunity, and thank you again for joining us.